one time, then I fell again. I fell a third time, can't get away from the sin. I keep falling, then I come back to you, crawling, asking forgive me now I'm ballin', knowing that I let you down, appalling. I don't wanna jeopardize my calling. When I hear your voice no more I'm halting. I just wanna live in the world you're revolving. I am so imperfect I'm getting involved in these flesh-tied friends, the blind consulting, pulling me away from the world and revolting. Asking for forgiveness is probably insulting, but you keep taking me back and you're vaulting. Give me chances. You keep giving me chances. You give me chances. You just keep giving me chances. King. Royalty, stand up, brand up, fam up, hand out, no way, hands up, know what, name that, it's mine, claim that, it's time, message, we shine, above all, the decline, the darkness cannot last, the shadow of my past, before I gain knowledge of heritage I have, the bloodline that I share, most powerful out here, the mover of mountains is who I am touting, the richest among us is who I'm the son of, from sundown to sun up, that's how I then come up, position is just mine, the favor in due time, can't have it, man you lying, the powerless you trying, enemy beneath me, there's nothing to teach me, the people receive me, cause my God complete me, and my God let's keep me, and my God they free me, and my God redeem me, and my God relieve me, king is the million, crown me, I am winning my position, God's giving God's and the God's king. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff, and as we do every week, I like to have conversations with people from all different points of the world, all different walks of life, all different types of people to really see what our commonalities is and are. I sound real ghetto. To really see what our commonalities are, and to really have a conversation about what it is that we all have in common and how do we all relate. Today, I have a really cool guest, and I was excited to bring this person on because I rarely get an opportunity to talk about relationships. And her name is Dana Che, and she's an inspirational speaker and author, a relationship life coach, and a host of her own online talk show called Real Relationship Talk. And I'm going to bring her on right now. What's up, Dana? How are you?
Hey, Shawn. I'm doing great. How are you today?
I am great. Now, where are you located at?
I am in the beautiful Virginia Beach, Virginia, where we have all 4 seasons in 1 week. So you never know what you're going to get.
Oh, yeah. That sounds, I mean, we're not far from you. So I'm in Washington, D.C. So,
okay.
Yeah, all the seasons in 1 week. And actually the last 4 days has been just that.
Exactly.
Yesterday we were 85. Today we're sitting at 50. It's great.
Keeps it interesting. Keeps it fun.
Yeah, right. If you say so. What, tell us about you a little bit before we get into these conversations, and the conversations of which I'm actually really excited about to have these particular conversations today. Tell us about yourself, where you come from, how did you get into just relationships, and how did you get into this, and what it is that you hope to accomplish here?
Yeah. Well, I have been married for more than half my life. So I just always like to start there because people are like, what? How old are you? You have kids that are grown. And so my husband and I have been married for almost 22 years. We got married super young. So I was 18 and he was 21. I always say I do not recommend that to people because what do you know about... Yeah,
sorry.
what do you know about life What do you know about yourself? And you sure don't know anything about marriage at 18 years old.
Right.
And so we got married really young. And of course, we started having problems like right away. And what I learned is that a lot of times we would try to reach out to people. We were both raised in the church. And so a lot of times we would try to reach out to folks in the church to help us with these issues that we were going through. And we really couldn't get any real help back.
Mm,
Either people acted like we had three heads and they had no idea what we were dealing with,
mm,
or it was just a lot of religiosity. It wasn't a lot of just good, solid relationship advice. And so
mm,
because of that, we struggled even more. And so we kind of made like a pact, if you will. And we said, if we ever get out of these struggles, we're going to make sure that we become the couple that we were looking for to other
mm,
people. And so we've just kind of lived
that's
our
good.
lives very openly, very transparently. We have always been very open with a lot of the struggles that we've had in our own relationship. And so because of that, people would just come to us and they would ask us for our advice, or they would ask us to pray with them or sit with them, or we've walked countless couples through a myriad of different marital issues. And
Mm,
so probably about 5 years ago or so, I really decided that I needed to be more intentional about kind of packaging this, if you will. And
sure.
so a couple years ago, I decided to fully go all in with becoming an actual certified marriage and relationship coach.
That's cool. Oh, that's super cool. Do you, so I think that creates incredible context for having a conversation. Like a lot of times I feel like if we don't create a context of who you are and what drives you and what reason that you do this, you actually just sound like you're preaching to somebody, like, you know what I'm saying? What,
Hmm.
so what, what are some struggles that you found that are like that that you've been through that you see other people go through? Like, is there like a common struggle?
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. And it's so common. It's like so common that I'm like, if we would only open our eyes, and this is why it's so important that you are transparent with your life. And I understand that people are on different journeys. People are on
Sure.
different levels of authenticity and vulnerability. There are some
Yeah.
people who are just wide open and they talk about everything, and there are other people who are a little bit more private and reserved. And even in my own marriage, it's like that. My husband is definitely more private and reserved, and I'm more like, ask me anything you want to know. I have no skeletons in my closet. You can ask me anything. And the two, I think, primary things that I see over and over again are unmet expectations
Sure.
and communication problems.
Mm,
And, the whole unmet expectations is really like a root of a lot of other issues. When people say things like, we have money problems, or we have sexual issue problems, or we have a lot of those symptomatic problems really come down to the root of somebody has some unmet expectations. And
sure.
oftentimes people are not actually sharing their expectations with their partner. So we go into these marriages assuming that they should know. Well, they should know that I like affection, and they should know that I want to have sex 5 times a week, and they should know that I like to be treated this way, and they should know. And so we do all of this should, but
Mm,
we never actually voice what our expectations are. And
mm,
therefore, we operate in a constant state of disappointment. And so that leads to a whole bunch of issues, just by itself. And then the other thing is the communication problems. And I think a lot of people that I hear in marriage, they'll say, we just don't communicate. And I'm like, impossible. We all communicate all the time. Now, what
right.
they mean is we don't communicate well. Okay.
Right.
And so, what I like to do is I like to walk couples through teaching them how to actually communicate effectively and how to communicate so that you're not always arguing and disagreeing. One of the things, Shawn, I think that people don't understand, and this is in communication in general, whether you're in a marriage or a business relationship or a parent
Sure.
child relationship or what have you, is
Mm-hmm.
that the purpose of communication is not agreement. The purpose of communication is understanding.
Yeah.
And so when you walk into a conversation and your goal is, I have to get this person on my side, I have to make them agree with me, then you've already lost. Because now you're not going to approach the conversation as a listener. You're not going to approach the conversation being open to any kind of new perspectives. You're only approaching the conversation with, this is my belief, these are my values, and this other person needs to come alongside me and agree
Right.
with me. And that's where
Right.
a lot of the breakdown happens in relationships.
So, you know, when you talk about uh, expectations being unmet, right? How do we get into that spiral of unmet expectations? Because I think sometimes people can go for years without having a conversation that things were unmet, and then look up and you're 4 years into a marriage and you're like, oh, financially we're not, and it's like, well, it does that coincide with communication, or is that something that is that something that you lay on the table when you first start dating somebody? Like, what is your expectations?
Absolutely. And this is why I absolutely love the part of my business where I really focus on premarital coaching. I think
Sure.
that a lot of couples get married, they have no real coaching, or they might go to their pastor for 2 weeks and think that that's going to do it. But we actually take a very deep dive for 2 months before I will marry a couple. I'm an ordained pastor as well. And so before
Okay.
I'll marry you, we are going to sit and we are going to really hash out some of these challenges. And I think that the unmet expectations happen a lot of times just in our families of origin. We
Mm,
grow up seeing our parents operate a certain kind of way. And
sure.
then we have these expectations like, well, my dad was the breadwinner. My
Hmm.
mom didn't work. And so you assume that your partner is going to be okay with that. Whereas that
Right.
other partner has this whole different family of origin where maybe they grew up in a single parent home and they saw
Hmm.
their mother hustle and grind. And so they're
Hmm.
like, what are you talking about? You want to be a stay-at-home mom? Like,
Right.
no, that's not what we're doing. And so something as big as that, like that decision is it going to be okay with you if I want to be a stay-at-home mom? People aren't
Yeah.
talking about that on the front end. And so then they
Right.
get married, have a child, and then all of a sudden the wife quits her job and the husband's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, well, I had always planned on being a stay-at-home mom," and they've never actually talked about it.
We've
So I
never
think
had
the
this conversation
biggest
before. Yeah.
challenge exactly. And so I think the biggest challenge comes in, like you said, without that communication, that real intentional communication about like, what do you expect this marriage to look like? What
Mm.
is your vision for this marriage? Like
Hmm.
people are getting married, they have no vision at all. No idea where they're going, where they're headed, how they're going to get there. They just think that
Mm.
they're automatically just going to arrive. And we don't do that with anything in life. If I live in Virginia Beach, if I want to get to where you are in DC, I'm going to have to put in some coordinates, into
Right.
my GPS. I'm going to have to tell my
Right.
GPS, this is where I want to go. And
Exactly.
then I will get there. And that's what people aren't doing in marriage. They're not putting in anything and they're just expecting to arrive at this beautiful paradise destination. And it's just crazy. It doesn't work.
Is there a beautiful paradise destination?
I
Like,
don't think, go ahead.
no, because sometimes I think people romanticize relationships that don't actually exist. Is it some such thing as a beautiful paradise destination? Like, does that a thing?
I don't believe that it's this paradise destination. Like, I'm going to get married and my prince is going to come in and we're going to live happily ever after. I don't believe in that. But I do believe with all my heart that you can create the marriage of your dreams. I'm
Right.
living proof of that. My husband
Yeah.
and I had a horrible marriage in the beginning because again, we had no vision. We had all the issues that I'm talking about on this podcast right now. We had all of
Mm.
these issues. It wasn't until we began to be intentional about where do we want to go and what do we want our marriage to look like. And
Sure.
then we were able to say, okay, well, if we want to get to Y, then we have to do RSTUVW to get to Y. And
Right.
so I don't believe in this romanticized, he's going to bring you roses and flowers every day and you're never going to argue and, life is going to be blissful. I don't believe that that exists because you have two imperfect people coming together trying to create a marriage. But I
Hmm.
do believe that it's possible for people to create the marriage of their dreams if they're willing to work for it.
Mm. That's very interesting. I wonder. I read something on your site that I was really intrigued by the question, and I'm gonna jack the question up, but I'm gonna get the idea of the question right. If there are so many resources for relationships out here, right? You've got all of these counselors and fake counselors and All of you have endless, endless Google searches that you could go on. You just gotta. It's just so much. There are so many resources. If there are so many resources, why is it that we are so terrible at relationships? It seems like we get worse at relationships as time goes. Is that a fair assessment? Are we getting worse, or were we already bad at it, but we just didn't believe in breaking up, and now we just believe in breaking up?
That's a great question. Let me answer the first question. I think the reason that we have so many resources out there, but relationships are not improving is because, A, we live in the information age right now. Like, all of us know how to lose weight, right? We know that you have to create a calorie deficit. You have to be able to consume less calories than your body is burning, right? And so, if we know that, why are we not all fit and in shape? We all know that we need to work out. We all know these things in our head, but
Sure.
they're not transforming into behavior. And it's the same thing with relationships. We've
Yeah.
got a plethora of marriage counselors and coaches and articles and videos and conferences and all of these things, but people aren't changing because it's not information that changes people, it's revelation that changes people.
Mm-hmm.
And, we see this even in scripture, where the Bible says, my people are destroyed, for a lack of wisdom, not for a
Mm-hmm.
lack of knowledge, because we all have information in our heads, but knowledge and wisdom are different. So
Right.
wisdom is applying the knowledge that we have. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a coach, what I tell my clients is I'm not here to just give you a whole bunch of information. I mean, I could send you website links all day long. That's not going to help you. You need a revelation of what is causing the issues in your relationship. And so that's why I always go to the root. I'm always wanting to talk to people about what is the root problem. The problem is not that you guys are arguing. That's not the problem. That's the symptom. So we could
Mm-hmm.
sit here for 2 months and talk about how to not argue, and we're going to waste your time, and you're going to leave here and you're going to go home and argue. Or we can get to the root of what is really going on behind the scenes that's creating this opportunity for you to disagree. Okay.
Right.
And then, the other part of that is just, what was the second part of your question, Shawn? I'm sorry.
Um, are are relationships worse today,
That's
do
right.
you think, than they were years ago, or are because of things like social media, are we exposed to the bad behavior that we have had, for a long time today? And so the relationships, like you said, the symptom of the relationships, you see more breakups and bad things happen, but maybe the source of it was always there. We just didn't see it. That's just
Right.
my theory.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And, you know, I honestly believe that we are getting worse at relationships.
Mm,
Think about it. Most of our grandparents were not getting married 3 and 4 times. You had
absolutely not.
those Papa was a Rolling Stone type grandpas out there. But for the most part, our grandparents were staying together. They were working through things. They were figuring it out. And I feel like number one, we live in a throwaway culture.
Hmm.
We've got, if you don't like it, you just throw it away and you get another one. I mean, I have
Right.
a cell phone right now. Nothing is wrong with this phone other than the fact that Apple came out with a new phone. And so guess what? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm gonna get the new phone. And so that's what we do in relationships. Nothing's wrong with that relationship that you're in. You're not necessarily agreeing all the time, but it's like, oh, look at that other option over there. And then talk about social media. I believe that social media has created opportunities that were not there before. Take, for
Okay.
example, you have a spouse who is tempted to commit adultery.
Sure.
Okay. Now, put that same spouse 50 years ago. They're going to have to work a lot harder at that. They don't have a constant stream of available people in the palm of their hand that they can choose from. That wasn't the
Literally.
case 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Whereas now, opportunities abound, temptation abounds anywhere and everywhere that you look. And so it's not necessarily made our hearts worse, but it's revealed, I think, what was already in our hearts, and it's given us more opportunities to wreck our relationships. And then the other thing
Yeah.
is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. Because like you said, it doesn't make our hearts better or worse. right?
Yeah.
There are some times that your character doesn't stand, but because there is no temptation there, your character isn't tried, right?
Mm,
And
that's right.
so and I guess, I guess what you're saying is there's more opportunities, more temptation to try someone's character, and if your character doesn't stand, you fall to the temptation. But whereas the temptation was never there, was not never, but the temptation wasn't there before. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
That
that's
was a
a
good
that's
point.
a is a great point. I was having a conversation with someone. We were having a session, and this person was saying how they've never been in a relationship before, and so they don't understand how certain temptations that other people face. They just don't understand that. And I said, well, it's because you've never been in a relationship before. You don't understand it because you've never experienced it. And so I think that's a valid point. I was just going to add that we also live in unlimited options culture. And so if you go to Starbucks, they have a million drinks that you can choose from. It's
Right.
like, sometimes it just makes your head spin. But they also have a secret menu in case you don't like any of those options. You
Wow.
can now come up with all of your own options, right? And we're used to that in our relationships. There's options that abound. And so I'm not going to stay with somebody for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years if they're not making me happy or serving me. And we see this even in Christian circles, right? Like I'll see these posts where amazing Christian women will be like, this isn't serving me well, so I'm no longer going to do that. And I'm like, oh, I must have missed that scripture that talked about where everything is supposed to serve us. That's not what we were called to. And so I
Mm-hmm.
just feel like we have taken our culture and all of the options, and we have allowed that to infiltrate into our relationships. And so people are not willing to stick through the hard times and really make a relationship work anymore because I've got 15,000 other options over here at
Mm-hmm.
the whim of my finger.
I want to ask you something. I'm gonna write this down because I'm gonna come back to this. I'm gonna come back to this. I want to ask you something before I because that might be detailed. Um, as it pertains, okay, so do you think that the process of marriage is wrong? Like, do we go about getting married the wrong way? Like, do we date? Let's say dating is the dating process wrong? Like, is what we look is what we let me phrase this question. Does what we look for in a relationship start our own relationship problems?
Mm. I feel like there's definitely some improvements that can be made with the dating culture that we have. I feel like people no longer are they're no longer dating to really get to know a person or to really add value to a person's life. It's basically like, do you meet my boxes? Are you the one who's going to check off all the boxes that I have for this dream spouse that I'm looking for? And so we'll date so that I can get to realize, not to necessarily get to know you as a person, but so that I can figure out if you are going to check off all my boxes. And so,
Mm,
because of that, people get married and they don't have developed friendships. They don't know their spouse. You've never seen them at their highs. You've never seen them at their lows. You have basically just interviewed this person and said, you know what? I think you fit the bill. And now I'm in love with you. And now we're going to live happily ever after. And so I do think that the way that we date needs to change. Um, yeah, so that would be my answer to that.
what do you think is the biggest thing that needs to change? So, um, is it pre or post marriage that you think the biggest change needs to happen? Like, do you need to make a change before you get married, or is it really like people are making huge mistakes inside of marriage? Is it married people, or is it single people like trying to get married? That's the bigger problem.
That's a great question. I believe that most of it is pre. And that's why I was saying earlier with I really am serious about premarital coaching because you cannot have a healthy relationship with two unhealthy people. And so
Right.
what happens is a lot of times, we've been taught again by the culture, you need to find somebody to complete you. That line was made famous in the Jerry Maguire movie, right? Oh, you
Mm-hmm.
complete me. And so we have a whole bunch of half completed folks running around trying to find their soulmate or trying to find the person who's going to complete them. And so they get married and they think, okay, good, now I'm complete. Now we're going to live happily ever after. And that does not work. The way to have a healthy marriage is to have two healthy and whole people. And so if you are on the front end talking about those expectations, talking about what are you looking for in a marriage, why are you getting married? You know, that's a great question that a lot of people have not really sat down and thought about. When my husband and I were in premarital counseling way back, you know, in 1998, 1999, I guess, we had our marriage counselor who was extraordinary. He asked us to write down 12 reasons why we were going to get married and we couldn't use the word love. And I'm going to tell you, Shawn, I struggled. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, because the go-to answer is, I love this
I love
person.
them.
We're in
Yeah.
love. I want to
Yeah.
create a life with them because we love
Right.
each other. And so when you have to think beyond that and really ask yourself, like, why do you want to commit the rest of your whole entire life? Like, think of how big of a commitment that is.
Right.
Are you willing to do that? We can't even commit to a cell phone for 2 years. You know,
Right.
we can't commit to a car note for 5 years. It's like, oh, nope, the new thing came out. And so I just think we've got to like be real with ourselves and say, okay, we have got to be willing to do the work on the front end. It's not about the wedding. And I'll tell couples, like, I'm glad that you're planning your wedding, but while we're in these 2 months of premarital coaching, I don't want to talk about your wedding. I want to talk about your marriage because the wedding is going to last for 2 hours. Your marriage is going to last for the rest of your life. So if you're not willing to invest on the front end into, and this is why I charge for premarital coaching, I don't believe that you should pay a DJ hundreds of dollars, but you won't invest into the actual health of the real relationship that you're creating with somebody.
How important? So if you do premarital counseling, how important is it to continue counseling post after you get married, and how long is it? Should you continue that counseling after you get married? Like, how important is that?
So important. You know, with the couples that I coach, I have a 3, 6, and 12-month follow up. You know, after 3 months, it's the first 90 days. Most couples are still in the honeymoon phase. Everything's great. Life is wonderful, you know, but I have had a situation where it was like they got married and then the things started falling apart almost immediately. And so we weren't even at 3 months yet before I had to go and intervene again. And so I think that that is so important. I like to talk about it like maintenance on a car. None of us buys a car, even if you buy it brand new off the lot, you know that your car is going to need maintenance in order for it to continue to operate at its peak
True.
performance. And so you're going to have to get those oil changes every 5,000 miles or 7,500 miles, however your car is made. You're going to have to get those tires rotated. You're going to have to get that alignment. You're going to have to do things. And it doesn't mean that your car is defective and bad. It means that you're using common sense. You
Right.
want to be able to
Right.
keep that car running at its best. And so it floors me when I hear a couple and they've been married for 5 years, 10 years, and most couples get marriage counseling or marriage coaching as a last resort. They're like, okay,
Yes.
I'm about to divorce him. However, before I divorce him, I want to be able to say I did everything I could. So you've got a couple of sessions to fix us. And it's like, wow, you know, where were you at 6 months in when you started
Right.
recognizing these challenges and these problems? Why didn't you reach out then? Where
Yeah.
were you a year in when you started being faced with all this temptation that you had no idea you were going to be faced with? And so
True.
I believe that it isn't just on the front end that couples need counseling or coaching. We've been married for 22 years. We regularly see our counselor. We have I believe every coach needs a coach. Every counselor needs a counselor. Every pastor needs
Absolutely.
a pastor, right?
Sure.
Every business leader needs a mentor. And so we regularly see our counselor. And I think that that's super important that couples, first of all, that we normalize therapy or coaching or counseling or whatever you want to call it. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with it. And that you actually utilize that throughout the entirety of your relationship.
Sure. I think that's. I think that what you say is super important. I love the way you do that. You related to car maintenance, and that's, you know, if you don't get your oil change in your car, you can expect that in 2 or 3 years your engine is going to lock up. Not,
Right.
you know, you didn't necessarily buy a bad car. You just didn't maintenance it properly, and
That's right.
and so I think that's a great analogy to use, I guess, for a guy anyway. Um, um, how, from your perspective as a pastor, how I hear a lot about people going to counseling at their church or whatever. And, I went to counseling at my church. So interesting enough, because I've been divorced, I went to counseling at two different churches. And, how do you hear a lot of people say about, they talk about counseling
Hmm.
at churches, and it's kind of critical a lot of times, with counseling at churches. Is is there a good way to go to church counseling, or like what do you think about premarital counseling as it pertains to like your religion or your faith or your church? Because some people don't want to go to someone who's not, like not a Christian.
Hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, I think we need to understand that we are tripart beings, right? We are body, soul, and spirit. And so a lot of times church counseling will focus on the spirit. They'll
Hmm.
talk about the scripture, rightfully so, right? They'll teach you the
Sure.
theology of why marriage is important. They'll talk a lot about the spiritual part. But many, I won't say all, because there's some amazing pastors who do great counseling, but many church counselors slash pastors will not really focus on the body soul aspect. And so the person might be full spiritually, but they're walking away not knowing how to manage their emotions, not
Hmm.
understanding, that the way you treat your body is going to affect your relationship. And
Hmm.
so I have done both. I've talked to Christian counselors, like actual licensed psychologist counselors, and then I have also talked to pastors and
Hmm.
everything in between. And so I feel like, just the way that I approach my physical health, I'm more of a naturalist, so I don't believe in like a ton of medication and drugs and all
Sure.
that stuff, right? I
Sure.
really try to, okay, the body was created to heal itself, so let me learn how to take care of my body. And it's the
Hmm.
same thing with marriage. I do a lot of preventive stuff now in our marriage. My husband and I do a lot of preventive stuff so that we don't have to, crawl into our counselor with a jacked up marriage, you know what I mean? And so I think that people just need to be wise, and it's okay to ask your pastor, are you skilled in X, Y, and Z? These are the problems that we're having. Are you skilled to help us? If not, would you be able to refer us? And so,
Hmm.
even with what I do as a coach, I let people know I am not a psychologist. So,
Right.
if you have childhood trauma and we're going to be trying to diagnose mental health issues, that is not my specialty. I am not trained to do that. However, I will gladly refer you to somebody who I feel like could really help you with that. And so
Hmm.
I think most pastors are, unless you just have some kind of like insecure pastor who thinks that they can just do everything on the, by themselves, I think most pastors would recognize their limitations and then be able to refer you to somebody who would actually be able to really help you with whatever those struggles are. But I would say to someone, do both. If you've got some kind of deep issue that you need like licensed psychology for, do that. And then follow up with your pastor. Keep him or her in the loop about what's going on. What are you discussing in those counseling sessions? Because
Hmm.
that pastor is going to definitely help you on the spiritual side. And of course, there are some pastors who are bivocational, who
Hmm.
they have they're pastors, but they're also mental health professionals. I mean, if you
Sure.
can get someone like that, great. All the better.
You said that you and your husband are very you're preventative in the way that you do stuff. Can you throw us some examples of preventative measures in a marriage? Like, what do you mean by that? What do you prevent? Like, give me some ideas. Like, throw us some throw us a couple of ideas. What do you mean by what preventative is?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I think the thing that popped in my head is keeping short accounts. You know, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 13 that love does not keep a record of wrongs.
Yeah.
And we do keep a record of wrongs as human beings, right? We got a
Sure.
tally sheet, a bank statement, all of it, right? We're like, okay, you did me dirty here, you did me dirty here, and we're keeping all of these accounts. So, one of the things that my husband and I do is we're very sensitive to, first of all, we're just sensitive to each other. And so, if I notice that he's acting a little different, he might be pulling away a little bit, I'm immediately going to try to ask him about that. And I don't accuse when I go to him. I'm not like, well, what's wrong with you? Why do you have an attitude today? Right. What I'll say is, hey, babe, is everything good with us? Like, is there anything that you want to talk about? Have I offended you in some way? Like, those are the kinds of questions that I'm going to ask him. First of all, to lower the tension in the house,
Sure.
but also because I'm approaching him as a learner. I'm not
Sure.
approaching you as someone who's trying to accuse you. I'm genuinely interested to know why you're treating me differently. Okay.
Right.
And so that little question there, I talk about this all the time, and I tell people, you would not believe how cared for your spouse would feel if you come to them in that way and say, I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that you've been down today. Is there anything I can do to help? Have I offended you in some way?
Mm.
So that would be one thing that we do. Another preventative thing that we do is date nights. Like, that alone, like there are couples who don't date. Think about when you're
Mm.
dating somebody before you get married, that's all you could think about. You go through great lengths to do all this extra stuff that you don't normally do. You're going hiking. You don't hike. You know what I'm saying? You're doing all this stuff to try to impress this person, and then you get married and then you just go ghost. And
Right.
so one of the things that we do is we date night. And I know that, obviously coming out of COVID, like it was more of a challenge because things were closed and restaurants were closing early or whatever. But even if we had to do a date night in the house, we're playing spades, we're watching a movie, we're playing eating popcorn, we put the kids to bed early, whatever it is that we have to do, like we have to protect that part of our
Yeah.
relationship. And so
Yeah.
these are a lot of people don't realize that the preventative stuff, again, look at a car, I'll use that analogy again. It is so much cheaper for you to get an oil change than it is for you to replace an engine. It
Right.
is so much cheaper, quote
Yeah.
unquote, for you to do some of this preventative stuff in your marriage versus now you got to go pay a divorce attorney or mediation, or now you've got to go pay, a therapist to see you every week because you didn't take the time to just do this little stuff on the front end.
Right. I think that's super super important. You know, from the moment from the moment I got married, date night was always important, right? And yeah, even through COVID, I think one of the most important things is not necessarily about the date, but about the time.
Mhm.
That the time that you spend together, that it's allocated, that it's intentional. And I think that you're completely right about that. Like, so that's good. I like like sometimes it's like, oh, you give us some nuggets so we can so we can walk away with it. Let me
Yeah.
ask you about something you said earlier. You said that we're living in a world of options,
Mhm.
and where options didn't exist before, and and we're living in a world where we have all of these options. Do you often meet people who, let me rephrase that. How because this is the world we live in, how do you turn that part down? How do you, because, when you're on the social media and you have a social media of all of these people, how do you turn that down? Is that just inherently something that we deal with now, or is there something that you give people to say, hey, you need to control what you see, or you need to control your intake? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, so we know it exists. How do we deal with it?
I mean, the word that came to my mind immediately is boundaries.
Hmm.
So many of us live without boundaries. People don't know what boundaries are. They don't know why to create them, how to create them, if they should have them. Even in marriage, you still need
Hmm.
boundaries. And
Sure.
so one of the things for me is that, I have boundaries in my marriage. I'm not going to go back and forth communicating with someone, a person of the opposite sex after 9 p.m. That's very old school. People are like, really, Dana, after 9 p.m.? I'm like, yes, that's just a boundary that I have. I don't, and of course, I have to talk to men for business and all things like that. There's
Sure.
nothing wrong with talking to men. However, you got to be able to have some absolutes, some things that you are going to set up in your relationship beforehand. This is another one of those preventive things that you're not waiting for your relationship to blow up. You're saying, I'm going to protect myself and my relationship by putting certain boundaries in play. And so I believe that the options are always going to be there. I mean, there are so many websites even now that you can go on. There are ways that you can hide apps on your phone. There, if you want to hide, you can hide very
Sure.
easily. And so
Sure.
it's not a matter of let's try to get rid of all of those. It's a matter of, first of all, do you want to be a person of integrity or not? Like,
Right.
you got to ask
Okay. Yeah.
yourself, is that who you want to be? When you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you want to see looking back at you? Do you want to be a person of integrity? Okay, you do? Great. All right. So then how are we going to protect that? How are we going to keep you from dipping in the cookie jar when you're not supposed to be in there? You're going to have to put some boundaries, in your life. And that's one of the things. I actually have an upcoming workshop on April 23rd, teaching people how to create boundaries in their relationship, because you would
Sure.
not believe how many people do not have them in their relationship.
Now let me ask you. I want to, because shoot, I could have this conversation with you all. We got a schedule to do a part 2 of this, because I I could have a conversation with you
Yeah.
all day, but we got limited time, and people's attention spans are not the greatest these days. What is a so I want you to give some advice to a newly married couple. And let's say, they're just newly married, and they just got married, not too long ago. What do you think is the most important thing on their journey that they're starting? What is the most important thing that you would say to a newly married couple?
It depends. If I'm talking to a Christian couple versus a non-Christian couple, I
Sure.
cannot overvalue the importance of developing a shared spiritual life if they're a Christian couple. Prayer works. I know it sounds so cliche, but it does. There have been times in my own marriage where it wasn't because of my skill, it wasn't because of my knowledge, it wasn't because of anything other than just prayer.
Sure.
Not even me just praying, because there were times in my own marriage where I wasn't praying because I was too mad, or I
Right.
was too hurt or whatever. And so, the prayers of my mom, the prayers of the church, the prayers of other people really lifting us up. And so I would think that you have got, as I said before, we are body, mind, and spirit. And so if you are not focusing on that spiritual aspect of your relationship, that's really the anchor that's going to keep you. I think of a scripture in Ecclesiastes 4 where it says a triple braided cord is not easily broken. And so when you're holding on to your cord and your spouse is holding on to their cord, well, there's a third strand, which is the Lord. And so at times I know I have let go of my end of the rope. And I know at times my husband has let go of his end of the rope. But because we had the Lord in that relationship with us, he kept us together.
Kept
And
us
so
together.
that is
Yeah.
always like number one, focus on your spiritual relationship. Attend church together, pray together. It doesn't have to be 30-minute prayers. A quick prayer in the morning when you guys are waking up, a quick prayer at night, either or do both if you want. But really focus on that relationship with the Lord. If I'm talking to a non-Christian couple, I will tell them, make sure that you guys are regularly communicating your expectations to one another. Find out what each other's love language is. Gary Chapman wrote the 5 love language books. I'm like, that book has been written or read by Christians and non-Christians alike. And so
Sure.
find out how your spouse needs to receive love and then work on loving them in that way. But I think the biggest thing is just keeping those lines of communication open and continuing to talk about what your expectations are.
Man, there's so much here, so much to that I hope that the audience can grab onto. There's always so much to talk about when we talk about relationships. Definitely want to get you back. I definitely want to get you back and get on a schedule to do something else. You said that you have what do you have coming up? You said you had something in April 23rd. 3rd, I think, and I can only remember
That's
that
right.
not because I remember
Yeah.
dates good, but because my vaccination second appointment is the
Okay.
22nd. Okay.
That's an important date, right?
But tell me about that. What is it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've got a boundaries workshop coming up. Originally, it was boundaries for women, but I always say I'm not going to reject the fellas if they come.
Okay.
But it's a workshop teaching people how to create boundaries in their life and in their relationships. And again, when I'm talking relationships, I'm not just talking romantic relationships. We need to learn how to create boundaries at work. In our work
Sure.
relationships, we need to learn how to create boundaries with our children because some
Yeah.
kids are just running all over their parents. And I'm like, what are you doing? And
Right.
so that's going to be on Friday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If people are interested in that, they can go to my website, danashay.com/workshops and find out how to register for that.
Is that a virtual workshop?
That is going to be a virtual workshop, yes.
Oh, sweet. Definitely check her out. Listen, I appreciate you coming on today. I appreciate you giving, just having the conversation. We already know this is going to be super useful to a lot of people. It's going to be a lot of replays on that. Got to hear that stuff over. Other than so you gave me 2 websites. Do you have anything else like social media, things of that nature, where people can get in contact with you?
I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Right now, YouTube used to be like my primary place, and then I kind of took a break, and so now I'm kind of on Instagram more. So people can find me on Instagram. I have 2 handles, so either at Dana Shay Williams, DANACHE Williams, or at Real Relationship Talk. They can find me on Instagram. But I usually just point people to my website. If you go to my website, danashay.com, you'll be able to find all my social media handles. You'll be able to find the podcast, The Real Relationship Talk. You'll be able to find my workshops and everything is in that one place, danashay.com.
Sweet. Listen, I appreciate you coming. I really do. We've got to do this again. This has been a real insightful, real just good to talk. So I'm glad you came. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shawn, for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. This has been the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff. Every Tuesday we release these and hopefully it will elevate your life, encourage your life, and inspire you to be greater at what you do. Thanks so much. Peace out.